Good evening. My name is Carly Leonard, and I'm going to be presenting on our textbook called Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age. I'm going to be going over chapter 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to be going over the main points, and then I'm also going to be doing at the end of the presentation, I'll be talking about whether I agree or disagree with project-based learning. And then I'm also going to be talking about if I feel that it's useful or not. Okay, so the first chapter we're going to be going over is chapter 3, and it's called Imagining the Possibilities. And it's really talking about establishing the framework of a project. So the first thing that I said was that when you're creating these projects, you want them to be highly contextual, and if you're trying to teach students things based around Common Core, if you don't really if you just teach it like out of the book, you're going to get generic and predictable outcomes from these students. So by doing projects, you create this outlet for them to make decisions and you create complex learning experiences for them to learn. And as you're starting to kind of think about what kind of projects you're going to be doing throughout the year, you need to go through the the table of contents of a teaching guide, or think about the big ideas of your specific curriculum. You want to review the standards, and after you're done doing that, you want to see which concepts overlap and the processes that you want students to understand, reflect on, and you need to think about why these concepts are important. So there's 3 main questions that you want to be thinking about when you're doing this. Who cares about this? Who does this touch? And who interacts with this topic in their work or daily life? Thinking about real-world concepts helps to reveal the true nature of the project. And it's said that project learning is similar to real life, because when you're creating projects, you're kind of scattered and you're trying to put everything together, and it gets messy just like life does. And you're overlapping multiple disciplines when you're creating projects similar to real life scenarios. It also brought up Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. This references learning actions. So the objectives are remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And the higher that you go through that list, the deeper, it's like a deeper level understanding of what's going on. So when you're doing project-based learning, you want to definitely emphasize the last 3, which are the analyze, evaluate, and create. They also, through the book, they wrote out an example between the difference of a traditional biography and a reconsidered biography assignment. And the traditional one is it says to study a distinguished person from the Renaissance period and write a report describing his or her life and notable achievements. But when you do the reconsidered biography, they want you to study 2 or 3 figures from Renaissance who distinguished themselves in the same field, which you're analyzing, you're evaluating, you're trying to compare these 2 or 3 figures. And then it says to develop criteria for Hall of Fame status, compare these figures' accomplishments, and then select one individual for inclusion in a Renaissance Hall of Fame. So this project is a deeper level of understanding where you're analyzing, you're evaluating, and then you're coming up and creating this bigger project instead of just picking a figure and writing a report on them, which is very basic compared to the other option that we were talking about. Projects can really prepare learners for the world beyond school. They ask students to collaborate and create, and in that sense, you're really touching on the digital age skills that we really need to be focusing on in this type of generation, because it's not the same as when we were going to school. So the next chapter we're going to be going over is chapter 4, and it's called Strategies for Discovery. This chapter really focused on like if you're looking over and trying to become aware with project-based learning and looking over lesson plans and things like that, they really talk about the pitfalls of trying to look over other projects that have been created already and trying to see like what actually works and what doesn't work. So like I said in that first bullet, it's how to use project plans that have already been made. And one of the tips that they did bring up was that you need to be selective and you need to look for quality. You need to make sure that the things that you're like looking at actually are going to be good for the learning outcomes that you have in your own personal classroom. So one of the pitfalls they talk about is long on activity, short on outcomes. So it says that if the project is busy and long, but reaches small or lower order learning aims, which is what we talked about with the Bloom's taxonomy, it's not worth investing your time in because you want to make sure that the project is perfect for your class and that it doesn't just, skim the top of a topic. You want to like dig deeper and actually like become familiar with what you're trying to teach them. The second one is technology layered over traditional practice, which they did reference like a research paper. And it says that good projects focus on reaching significant learning outcomes, not just like using technology to kind of like get those not just to reach those certain standards of trying to incorporate technology into a class setting. The other one is trivial thematic units. And as I was reading through this, the thing that stood out to me the most is that it stated that thematic teaching is not necessarily project-based learning. It's structured differently. And they use an example of like trying to teach a class about oceans. That's not necessarily something that you could make into like a group project, but you can split up the categories and like dig deeper and then relate it to like real life scenarios. Like when they go to a grocery store, like there's seafood there that comes from the ocean, and just relate it to your class in that way. Another pitfall that they talked about was overly scripted with many steps. And that also says that the best projects have students making critical decisions about their learning path. You need to be careful with project plans that have a lot of discrete steps because you want to make sure that you're not creating like limited and predictable outcomes. You want these outcomes of your projects to be unique, and so that each child in your classroom has like a different understanding of the topic and what's going on in your lessons. Another pitfall is not enough focus on formative assessment. And they talk about assessments in chapter 5 as well, but assessment needs to happen early and very frequently in project-based learning. You need to check in on students and make sure that they're understanding the content, and if they're not, you need to help them get back on track as to where they need to be, and that's why you need to check in on them so that they don't just turn in this finished project and it's all over the place and it doesn't even meet the standards that you were hoping for. The last one is assessment that doesn't feel authentic. When students are doing real world projects, their work should be assessed in a way that you can actually like measure and see it happening in real life, and that they actually put in the time and effort, and that there's quality in the project that they're doing. And then the last point that I put was that the best projects share important features. So there's many qualities that really good projects share, and some are center on driving question or are otherwise structured for inquiry. They're realistic, cross multiple disciplines, and there's many more that the book states, but I was just listing a couple. So chapter 5 is called Making Assessment Meaningful. This whole chapter is based around assessments throughout project-based learning. Assessment opportunities are found throughout the project process. Students learn more students learn more with assessments throughout instead of just at the end. So if you check in, like I said on the last slide, it creates a deeper level of thinking, and you're actually making sure that the students are following along with the learning outcomes of the project. There's two main purposes for assessment: measuring student learning in a summative way, and also evaluating the quality of the project so it can be even better the next time. If you check in and you see that a lot of your students are struggling with like one certain spot, you know that next time how to tweak it or make sure that it is more clear for next time. So it's not just like helpful for you, it's helpful for the students, and it just makes the whole project better. When you're looking at activities and you're thinking about assessment, you want to ask like what approaches might they take to go from not knowing to knowing. Objectives, what will students learn through this project, and with evidence you want to ask what would they need to demonstrate to show that they learned. End of project assessment focuses on gains toward learning goals. So after the project is said and done, you kind of want to see like if they have mastered all of the goals that you set up to achieve throughout this project. The chapter also talks about how to create a rubric for projects, and then it also touches on formative assessment, and that sums up chapter 5. So the next step of this project was to talk about if we agree or disagree. And after reading the chapters, I do agree that project-based learning is very helpful. In chapter 3, it talks about how it relates to real-world problems and how you get a deeper level of understanding with the analyze, evaluate, and create. And even like in chapter 4, when they were talking about like the pitfalls, they also like gave good reasons as to why projects can be successful, and how they actually can help students like understand concepts better. And then we also needed to talk about if we thought that project-based learning was useful. I think it is useful for a teacher because you can do a lot of check-ins. You can see if the students are actually mastering the objectives that you want them to. You can see if they're all on track, if they're keeping up with their work. And I think that it is helpful for students, or useful for students as well, because it's very hands-on. I remember like when I was in high school, when we were assigned projects, I felt like they were a burden, but at the same time, I felt like after doing these projects, I had a deeper understanding of the topic because I was actually like hands-on working with it and trying to make like a project and then like to understand it better.